last time you seen this drive unit, it was not behind this car, it was here. But now I have moved it over in the meantime behind our 2013 Model S85 because it had a little issue with the drive unit. And I'm gonna explain here as you can watch me work trying to get this thing under there and put in place. I'll explain what happened and why I'm sticking a new or a salvage drive unit into our Model S. As you can see, I again have the yellow strap there attached to the car. Again, the ground is almost flat, but certainly not level. So the back end of the car wants to roll downhill on the jacks, so I did have to tie off the back end of the car so it wouldn't roll away. And well, because it is not flat, not level, and gravel, that makes it all more difficult. If this would be on like a concrete floor, you could use a pallet jack and just roll that thing under there real easy. But again, I have to drive it, or have to pull it under there, driving the tractor. And as I pulled on it, the friction was not exactly the same on one side and the other of the pallet, and the pallet already came crooked, and then I have to realign and pull the other direction and forward and back. So it made it quite a bit more time consuming and difficult to align this drive unit here. Also, you can see there in the bottom right corner, that is a battery pack. And that is actually the battery pack that came out of this Tesla right here. And I hope you have seen our video. If not, there will be a link down in the description, as well as one here at the top of the screen should pop up right now. And go watch that, as I did the replacement on the battery pack. And I'll get into why the battery pack was replaced and why I'm replacing the drive unit here in a minute. So, but anyway, replacing or reinstalling this drive unit is relatively simple. It's the reverse order of taking it out. So if you took it out, then you know how to put it in. No big deal. Couple differences. The car it came out of had air suspension. So there was a sway bar on this rear drive unit, or on the suspension. That was it, and the sway bar was attached to the subframe. While the car here that it's going into has coil springs and does not have a sway bar. So I took the sway bar off and the links off, no big deal. The suspension, subframe, everything else is exactly the same. There's no difference. There are sway bars, different kinds of sway bars depending on the car, if it's a performance, a base model, so on and so forth, whatever. So, but for us, I had to take the sway bar off. You may have to replace it with the sway bar that you had on the car that you took the broken drive unit out of, because the drive unit you got, or with the subframe here, may not have the same sway bar, so you want to pay attention to that. Other than that, it's the same. And so it just has to get on there and be lined up with the 4 bolts, the 4 last bolts that I took out to remove the drive unit that actually hold the subframe to the chassis. Those need to be lined up. And because of all these different angles I have going here with the slope and being not level, and actually only lifting the rear end of the car in this case, that added another difficulty because it throws off more angles to get that thing in there and to get the bolts lined up. And I have to admit, I struggled quite a bit. This was the most difficult part, to line those 4 bolts up. They're huge bolts. It seems like should be super easy, but I did struggle with that. So yeah, if you could do this on a paved a parking lot or a concrete floor or something, it would be much easier. If you have a pallet jack, you could just turn that thing on there, and it would be so much easier. If you can do it on a lift, again, if you have a 2-post lift or something, that would be way easier too. You could just raise the car, bring this drive unit in. Again, you could use a transmission jack, a pallet jack, a table, whatever, right? Many options. So, yeah, well, as you'll see me struggling here, I will explain first about the battery pack that is sitting there. Like I said, go and watch that video about replacing the battery pack. Also, replacing the battery pack is not really hard to do. Any automotive technician should be able to do so. And it requires the same thing as replacing the drive unit. You need to bleed the system, which makes it easy if you have Tesla Toolbox. Okay, if you do not have Tesla Toolbox, again, You just have to drive the car, turn it on, and hope that it all bleeds out. But you can get actually access to the Tesla service manuals, as well as you can rent Tesla Toolbox. And I'm going to put a link down below in the description, and hopefully another one is popping up at the top of the screen that will explain where and how you can get the service manuals from Tesla for free. Okay, Tesla Toolbox, on the other hand, you have to rent, you have to subscribe to. I'm not sure what they're offering right now as you're watching this. There was a daily, then there was a 3-day, there was a weekly or a 5-day, and then there was maybe a monthly and a year. So I don't know, it has changed over time, but you can rent Toolbox, and that's what I did, because while this car was sitting here, I did replace the battery pack and the drive unit at the same time, so I could go for a very short subscription on Tesla Toolbox and do all I needed, and then some playing around. But basically the main thing I needed from Tesla Toolbox at that time when I did this job is I needed it to bleed the coolant, which I could have gotten by with just, you know, driving it and then topping off. But at this time, this car here, these older Model S's, they were lagging behind in software at that time, and you couldn't access service mode unless you were at a service center. If you were within the Wi-Fi range of the service center, you could open service mode, but nowhere else. And so at that time when I did this job, I could not get into service mode. But having Tesla Toolbox, I could request a software update, and that is not a new software update now, that's requesting the software that's already on there to be reloaded. And that's all it takes to basically pair your battery or your drive unit to the car. So there's nothing else required but a software update. And now, by the time you're watching this, even these old models now can get into service mode, even if they're not at the service center. And you can just request the software update, and it will pair your drive unit or your battery pack to the car. So it has become even easier since then, and I don't know if I still would subscribe to Tesla Toolbox at this point. I mean, it's a peace of mind if you can bleed the system via Tesla Toolbox, but then that said, air will move out as the pumps come on. Just don't drive the thing like a maniac under extreme conditions, and you should get the air out within a couple days or so, and just keep topping off the coolant. So, well, battery pack. Why did we replace the battery pack? No, the battery was not bad. That is the most important fact that people don't understand. Tesla replaced tons of battery packs, not because the batteries were bad, because the contactors inside the battery pack were bad. And they replaced a lot of them in the early years because those contactors went out. They have been an issue in the earlier models and needed to be replaced. But Tesla service centers were not allowed to get into a battery pack. They could only replace them as complete whole packs, which didn't really bother anybody too much because it was under warranty, so you just got a new pack for free, basically. And now that it's, well, this is 10 years old now, this car. Nowadays, the Tesla service centers are allowed to open the pack and replace the contactors. I believe it's about $1,700 to do so. So that is an option, and that was the problem we had with this car. And I mean, that was not bad. This car has over 200,000 miles when these well, the contactors actually did not completely fail. The Tesla system noticed the problem and have given us a warning already a couple of thousand miles ago, and I knew I could get stranded actually with these contactors, but I just kept going. And so eventually we got the salvage Tesla, and well, the salvage Tesla only had 128,000 miles. There was no warning or no fault codes for contactors. So I decided to just swap the entire battery pack because that makes more sense rather than opening up two battery packs and swapping the contactors. That doesn't make any sense. I might as well take the low mileage battery pack with the good contactors and throw it in my high mileage car. And then my high mileage battery pack finally at that point would come to use what it was intended for, and that is as a energy storage system for our solar at the house. So there was nothing lost. These batteries are in perfect condition even at 200,000 miles. There was no issue with it. It had about somewhere between 10 and 15% degradation roughly. I never did an accurate degradation test with the 200,000 mile battery pack. This is just based on my experience on how far I could drive on this pack, how it would charge, how it would behave while charging and equalizing at the end, as well as the mileage that it would show, the range the car would show. So yeah, that is why this battery pack still sits there, because we replaced both basically at the same time. And so, but now there's the drive unit. Why the heck are we replacing the drive unit? Well, the car left us stranded. Yes, we got stuck. Luckily, just about 2 or 3 miles from home, I picked up my daughter from sports and we're driving home. And the car just shut down. I didn't even notice it, since there's obviously no engine noise, and if it shuts down you don't really notice anything. I just I went around the light turn, and I'll let go of the accelerator a little bit, and as I go back on to accelerate out of the turn, nothing happened, and I just pushed more and more on the accelerator pedal and nothing happened. And then I'm looking at the dash and I see a warning message there, and there's some weird stuff going on. It's like, what the heck's going on? And, well, the funny thing is, the car says rear drive unit disabled, okay to drive. Which I thought that's pretty funny, because the car thought it is an dual motor. But it's only a rear wheel drive, so if the rear motor is disabled, we're not driving anymore. But it was rolling nicely, so I had plenty of time to actually roll it a little bit off the road. It was actually on the road in the valley here coming home, so there's not much traffic or anything. The only problem is there is really no cell service. If one gets lucky, here and there is a spot. If you don't move, you can actually make a call. So my daughter had to get out, take the cell phone, and I told her just start running towards home, and if you get cell phone connection somewhere, you're lucky and you can make the call. And so she didn't have to go far and make the call. Actually, she got only about 50 or 100 yards and got a signal. So, and then my wife came down with the truck and we towed the car home, and there was nothing I could do. There was no reset that did anything. The drive unit was disabled. Did I know that this would be happening? Yeah, I kinda did, because the car started making weird noises. I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before. I'm a technician, and so I don't care too much. I drive till it breaks, right? So it made a weird noise that sounded kind of like a wheel bearing noise in a way, but it's easily to detect wheel bearing noises, whatever noise it makes. As you step on the brake, usually that noise changes or goes away. Because if you have wheel bearing noise, that's usually associated with play in the wheel bearing. There's some slack in there, and as you step on the brakes, the brake caliper is pressing onto the discs and forces that slack out of there, or well, pick it up, and so noise usually goes away, or at least changes. And so that was not the case. And another funny thing is, as I was backing up really slow, the noise was louder than going forward. And I tried a few things, you know, shifted in neutral while we're rolling to see if something changes, speed up, slow down, see how it changes. And it just would not follow any pattern at all. I could not figure out what it is, but the noise sounded extremely familiar, and I just couldn't figure it out. So my thinking was maybe motor bearings, because motor bearings have been an issue. But again, it didn't make sense, because it didn't behave according to these little tests that I did. So, well, eventually I got lucky. I asked a friend if he could access my car and maybe tell me what's going on, what that fault code actually is that I got. That is after it broke down, because I had a fault code in there, but I couldn't find the fault code in the service manual in the list there. And, well, he looked it up and said, yes, this is your drive inverter. There is an issue with the drive inverter, and it says it is out of phase. And that's when it clicked in my head, and I knew exactly where I heard this noise before, from electric motors. If you have 3-phase electric motor and one phase is out or off or something, it starts that weird noise. And it clicked right then and there, and I knew, yep, that's what it is. And so I knew, yes, we have a problem with the inverter. Now that said, what the problem is with the inverter is tough to tell. Also, it's not a common issue that the inverter actually has a problem. Like I said, commonly the bearings go out in those motors, mostly in the performance models. One thing to check on the motor side, there is a speed sensor that checks the rotations of the motor, and you can pull it out, and if that is wet, then you know you had a coolant leak into the motor, which commonly takes the bearings out. There is a few instances of coolant leaks into the inverter as well, which has taken inverters out. So my buddy told me how to check for that real quick, and it was an interesting procedure because it required to disconnect the 2 high voltage cables that go into the inverter, which means you have to power your car down, disconnect the fireman's loop, and disconnect the 12-volt battery, and then you can get in there, take the cover off, check for voltage. If there's no voltage there, you undo the bolts, you pull those out, and then you gotta go onto the inverter side there, not onto the cables, onto the inverter side with an ohm meter, and depending on which motor you have, you are supposed to see a certain resistance. And if it's not within specs, they say the inverter is bad. The funny thing is, they also say it may be within specs, but the inverter may still be bad. So it's kind of tricky. So if you have that weird noise, your inverter is probably bad even if it's within specs. So I pulled this drive unit out of this car after that, and I set it aside, and one day I will have to open it up and we'll look inside and see, and I'll bring you along for the trip. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out when this happens here. I hopefully soon have time to do this, to lift the drive unit out of the subframe and open up the inverter side and see what the heck we're finding in there. So again, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out, and also go down below real quick and give us a like, give us that thumbs up so we get that YouTube algorithm going a little bit. So anyway, yeah, that's how we figured out our drive unit was bad, and that's why we are putting this drive unit in. I could have swapped just the drive unit itself. What is the drive unit anyway? The drive unit is basically 3 components. One is the motor. As you're looking at it here on the picture, the motor is to the left, that round thing. The second component is the drive inverter, which is the round thing to the right. And in between, sandwiched where the drive shafts come out, that is basically the differential, your gearbox, if you want to call it a gearbox. You can't really shift, but there's a reduction in there. So those are the 3 components. That's the actual drive unit. What I'm replacing here is the drive unit complete with subframe and suspension. So since I have that salvage, I just swapped the whole thing rather than separating the drive unit from the subframe and swapping it out, because that also would have required me to swap the half shafts and everything. So it's a lot more work, and why do that if I can just take the sway bar off and stick the other one under there, as I wasn't aware of anything being wrong with this whole thing. So it's as easy as just swapping the whole thing. So it kind of depends on your situation and what you have, but even a drive unit is relatively easy to swap. So it sits somewhere close to where it needs to be. So we're seeing here a closer look under there. And by the way, those pliers you see there with those red handles, those clamp off the coolant hoses. We have one on each side so that no coolant drains out of the car itself. Trying to preserve all that. Also, you probably see this one here has a battery pack in there, unlike the salvage that it came out of in the previous video. If you haven't seen the previous video, there should be a link popping up at the top, as well as one down in the bottom. There you see the orange high voltage cables going to the drive inverter. And well, now we just gotta lower the car on it and put the bolts in, kind of deal, and we're done. As I pointed out earlier, that was the most trickiest and toughest part of all, because it is pretty heavy, this whole drive unit. So it's hard to move, especially on this ground. It's almost impossible to move. And so I even needed to bring the tractor back out. And what takes here a couple minutes in reality took over half an hour to get this drive unit aligned so I can put the 4 main bolts in it. And well, then, like I said, everything is in reverse order. You just have to hook it up and bleed the coolant system one way or another and do a software update, and the car is drivable again. So that said, it's basically possible to do for a automotive technician that is doing ICE cars forever. Can probably swap this out. It's really not that hard to do. You may want to do it yourself, you may not want to, but what I'm trying to show also with those videos, these are still cars, there's still basically mechanical components in there, and it doesn't have to go back to a Tesla service center. It can definitely go to an independent EV shop somewhere to get this done, so you don't have to necessarily pay the more expensive Tesla service rates that are comparable to dealer rates for other cars, where you would not take your regular ICE car to a dealer anyway. You don't necessarily have to take a Tesla to a dealer, especially if it is out of warranty. Then you may choose an independent EV shop, or maybe a regular shop that does work like that. If they have a technician and you trust them, you can certainly go there. So, or if you are a mechanic of sorts or pretty handy dandy, then you might attempt this yourself. And like I said, service manuals are currently available for free online with all the instructions on how to remove and reinstall step by step in those service manuals. So, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and go down below and hit this thumbs up. Give us a like for this video. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to our channel. And in any event, thank you for watching. Goodbye.